Hello everyone, this is Naomi, and today I'll take you on a journey to Bangkok's famous floating markets. I'm so excited to share this special experience with you. These floating markets are not just places to buy and sell, they are living history. Once, they were the lifeblood of the city, before Bangkok had roads. Today, I'll share with you the stories of the women who make these markets come alive. You'll hear about their lives, their work, and what makes these markets so special. So, let's dive right into it. I arrived at the floating market just as the day was beginning to stir. The sky was still a deep blue, but the first rays of sunlight were breaking through the horizon. The air was cool, with a slight humidity that clung to my skin, a reminder that the heat of the day was soon to come. Boats were already drifting lazily on the water, their wooden hulls creaking softly as they swayed with the river's gentle current. I watched as the vendors, mostly women, began setting up their stalls with practiced ease. They moved quickly, but without haste. Every action seemed deliberate, as though they had done this 1,000 times before. The colors of the produce, deep red tomatoes, bright yellow bananas, and leafy green herbs, stood out vividly against the dark water. There was a quiet hum of activity, the soft murmur of voices, blending with the occasional splash of water as boats gently bumped against one another. I could smell the fresh produce, mixed with the faint scent of grilled fish from a nearby stall. As I wandered through the narrow waterways, I felt a mix of calm and anticipation. This place was unlike anywhere I had ever been. There was a sense of history here, of lives lived on the water. I thought to myself, this is a market that breathes with the river, a place that moves with the water. As the market began to wake up, the pace of life quickened. Vendors were now calling out to passing boats, their voices carrying across the water. I could hear the clatter of cooking utensils, the sizzle of food hitting hot pans. The smell of grilled fish became stronger, mixing with the rich aroma of simmering broth and fresh herbs. I walked closer to one of the boats where a woman was preparing a popular dish, Kaim Sikkanum Krok *, small coconut pancakes. She smiled warmly as she ladled the batter into small molds, her hands moving with the rhythm of someone who had done this countless times. The pancakes sizzled as they cooked, releasing a sweet, comforting aroma. I couldn't resist and bought one. It was warm in my hand, and when I bit into it, the contrast between the crispy exterior and the soft, sweet interior was perfect. As I stood there eating, I watched the flow of life around me. Boats passed by with families, children laughing as they splashed their hands in the water. A vendor across the canal was haggling with a customer, her voice rising and falling in friendly negotiation. There was a rhythm to it all, like the market itself had a heartbeat. As I explored deeper into the market, I noticed how each vendor had her own space, her own rhythm. Every boat seemed to tell a story, and every woman had a unique presence. I approached one woman named Molly, who was carefully arranging vibrant fruits in neat rows. She had a calm, focused expression, but when she looked up and saw me, her face broke into a warm smile. Molly has been working in this market since she was a teenager. She told me how her family had always been part of the floating market. "This market is like a second home for me," she said, her voice full of pride. As we talked, I noticed how gracefully she moved, her hands always in motion, even as she spoke. She had a quiet strength about her, a kind of resilience that comes from years of hard work. I asked her if working on the water every day was difficult. She laughed lightly and said, "It's not easy, but it's my life. The river gives me peace." As I stood there, listening to her, I couldn't help but admire her dedication. There was something timeless about her presence, like she was connected not just to the market, but to the river itself. I thought about the women back in Japan, working in quiet markets, and how different this world was. Here, everything was out in the open: life, work, family, all blending together. In that moment, I realized that this market was more than just a place of commerce. It was a way of life, a reflection of the strength and resilience of the women who worked here. After speaking with Molly, I wandered further down the canal, where I met another woman, Pim. Pim was a young mother, balancing her work at the market with raising her 2 children. Her boat was smaller than Molly's, but it was filled with an assortment of vegetables, freshly picked that morning. As she worked, her youngest child sat quietly at the front of the boat, watching her with wide eyes. I asked her how she manages to balance everything: work, family, and life on the water. She smiled and shrugged, saying, "You just do it. There's no other way." Her answer was simple, but I could see the strength behind her words. She spoke about how her family has worked these waters for generations. "The river takes care of us, but we also take care of the river," she said, glancing at the water as she spoke. There was a deep respect in her voice, not just for her work, but for the water that sustained her family. As we spoke, the sun was rising higher, and the market was now fully awake. Boats were now moving steadily up and down the canal, filled with tourists and locals alike. The sound of bargaining filled the air, mixed with laughter and the occasional splash of water. Pim handed me a bundle of fresh herbs as a gift before I left, and I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. I left her boat with a sense of admiration, not just for her hard work, but for the way she balanced everything with such grace. As I made my way back through the market, I thought about how these women weren't just vendors, they were the heart of this place. Their strength, their resilience, and their deep connection to the water were what kept the market alive. As I continued through the market, I couldn't help but reflect on how deeply intertwined the lives of these women were with the river. In many ways, the river was not just a source of income, it was a way of life. This reminded me of markets back in Japan, where the pace often feels more measured, more controlled. In Tokyo, for example, markets are usually organized, with neatly arranged stalls and structured interactions. Here, however, everything felt more fluid, like the market itself was moving with the water. There's a certain chaos, but it's an organized chaos, one that everyone seems to understand instinctively. I thought about how this reflects the Thai way of life, more open, more connected to nature. In contrast, Japan, with its precise schedules and structured systems, often feels more separated from nature. But here, the river is life. It flows through everything, and the people move with it. This connection to the natural world reminded me of the importance of slowing down and appreciating the world around us. As I watched the women move through their day, I could see how they had adapted to the rhythms of the river. They worked in harmony with their environment, not against it. It made me wonder how much we, in our modern, fast-paced lives, could learn from this. Perhaps we need to slow down and listen to the rhythms of our own surroundings. As I stood there, watching the boats drift by, I realized how much this market was a reflection of the Thai spirit. There was a certain grace in the way everything seemed to flow together: people, boats, and the river itself. I thought back to Songkran, Thailand's famous water festival, which I had experienced a few years ago. Just like the market, Songkran celebrates water, its cleansing power, its ability to renew and refresh. During Songkran, the streets of Bangkok are filled with laughter and water fights, as people splash each other with water to wash away the old year's bad luck. It's a joyful chaos, much like the floating markets, full of life, full of energy. But beneath the surface of the celebration is a deep respect for water and its role in everyday life. In Japan, we have similar rituals, though they are often quieter, more solemn. I thought about the contrast between our cherry blossom festivals, where people gather under the trees to celebrate the fleeting beauty of nature. In both cultures, there's a recognition of the impermanence of life, but the expressions are so different. Here in Thailand, it feels more open, more raw. As I reflected on this, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for being able to experience this way of life, even for a short time. The women I met today, Mali, Pim, and the others, had shown me a different perspective on life. They weren't just working, they were living, fully immersed in the rhythms of the river and the market. And in doing so, they had found a balance that so many of us search for. I wondered what lessons I could take back with me to my own fast-paced life. Perhaps it's about slowing down, finding harmony in the everyday moments. Or maybe it's about being present, truly present, in whatever we do. As the day went on, I spent more time observing the daily routines of the women at the market. Each woman seemed to have her own rhythm, yet they all moved in harmony with the flow of the river. I watched as they interacted with their customers. Some were regulars who stopped by every day, while others were tourists experiencing the market for the first time. There was a sense of community here. The women knew their customers by name, often exchanging a few words or a laugh before completing the sale. I noticed that many of the women worked alongside their families. Mothers worked alongside their daughters, teaching them the trade, while grandmothers kept a watchful eye from the boat's edge. It was clear that this wasn't just a job, it was a family tradition. I spoke with one woman named Nuan, who had been working at the market for over 30 years. Her boat was filled with hand-woven baskets and brightly colored scarves, each one made by her or her family. She told me how her mother had taught her the craft when she was a little girl. "Everything I know, I learned from my mother, and now I teach my daughters," she said, her voice filled with pride. As she spoke, her daughter was sitting beside her, weaving a basket with the same careful precision. It was a beautiful moment, a passing down of tradition, from one generation to the next. I asked her if she ever thought about doing something else. She smiled and shook her head. This is my life. The market, the river, it's all I've ever known, and I wouldn't want it any other way, she said. Her words stayed with me, a reminder of the deep connection these women had to their work and to each other. As the day progressed, I noticed how the market seemed to operate in waves. There would be a flurry of activity, boats pulling up, customers haggling, and goods being exchanged. Then, just as quickly, the market would quiet down, with only the sounds of the river and the gentle rustle of goods being rearranged. It was as if the market breathed with the rhythm of the river itself. During one of these quieter moments, I spoke with an older woman named Supa, who had seen the market change over decades. Her face was lined with years of hard work, but her eyes were sharp and full of life. She told me stories of how the market used to be much smaller, with fewer boats and fewer tourists. But now we have people from all over the world, she said, gesturing to a group of tourists taking photos nearby. Supa explained how the market had adapted to the changes over the years. We used to rely only on locals, but now tourists are a big part of our business, she said. I asked her if she missed the old days. She smiled and shook her head gently. Change is part of life. The river changes, the market changes, and we change with it, she said, her voice steady and calm. Her words made me think about how resilient these women were, adapting to whatever came their way. They didn't resist change, they embraced it, just as they embraced the flow of the river that sustained them. As I said goodbye to Supa, I felt a deep sense of respect for the generations of women who had made this market what it is today. They weren't just selling goods, they were preserving a way of life, one that had endured for centuries. As the sun began to set over the floating market, the golden light reflected off the water, casting long shadows across the boats. The atmosphere had shifted once again, this time to something quieter, more reflective. I found myself standing on the edge of one of the narrow canals, watching as the women began to pack up their goods for the day. There was a sense of closure in the air, but also a quiet understanding that tomorrow they would be back, ready to do it all over again. I thought about everything I had seen and heard throughout the day, the strength of these women, their connection to the river, and their ability to adapt to the ever-changing world around them. The floating market wasn't just a place to buy and sell goods, it was a living, breathing community, shaped by the hands of these resilient women. Their stories reminded me of the importance of resilience, not just in the face of change, but as a way of life. I realized that, like the river that flows through Bangkok, life is constantly moving, changing, adapting. And just as the women of the floating market have done for generations, we too must learn to move with it. As I left the market that evening, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the experience. It wasn't just a day spent in a market, it was a day spent learning about life, resilience, and the strength that comes from community. The floating market had shown me not only the beauty of Bangkok, but the beauty of the human spirit. In the end, my journey through the floating market wasn't just about discovering a new place, it was about discovering new perspectives. The women I met today, Molly, Pim, Nuan, and Supa, each showed me something different, but all shared the same deep connection to their work and to the river. It made me think about my own life, and how we can all find strength in the everyday things that keep us grounded. The floating market, like life, is ever-changing, but there is beauty in that change. And perhaps the greatest lesson I learned is that sometimes it's not about resisting the flow, it's about learning to move with it. As I walked away from the floating market, the sounds of the boats and the river gradually faded into the background. The sun had now dipped below the horizon, and the market, once so full of life and energy, was returning to its quiet, peaceful state. But even in the quiet, I could feel the pulse of the place. The river, the market, and the people were all connected, moving in harmony. This day had taught me more than I ever expected. It wasn't just about experiencing a new culture or seeing a different way of life. It was about understanding that there is strength in resilience, beauty in change, and peace in letting go. The women of the floating market showed me what it means to live in harmony with one's surroundings, to embrace the rhythms of life rather than fight against them. I realized that in my own life I had often been so focused on controlling everything, my schedule, my goals, my work, that I had forgotten to simply be. But here, on the river, I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let go and trust the flow. As I make my way back to the city, I carry with me the lessons of the floating market. Lessons of resilience, connection, and the quiet power of moving with the flow of life. And so I leave you with this thought. In a world that is constantly changing, sometimes the best thing we can do is to stop resisting and simply flow with it. Thank you for joining me today on this journey through Bangkok's floating market. I hope you found something meaningful in the stories of these incredible women, just as I did. Until next time, this is Naomi, signing off.